Muito obrigada. Fica na tela, como faz isso.
Yeah. You've already introduced it.
No, not.
Okay.
I was telling about the dynamics,
Okay.
the role idea.
I'm taking this jacket off because I can't stand it any longer.
No, please. And I was telling about also the Q&A sessions. The Q&A sessions. So. People, you could learn. Do I hearing her? Me too. And I don't know the conditioning, but it's still in process. Yes.
Peraí, gente, coisa do mundo livre.
Isso.
Eu estou aqui dentro dessa sessão.
Yeah, ready to go. So I will start again for you and for those who are joining the session online. We are live on YouTube, so we were waiting for people to join the session. And we will try to pay as attention as you, as the people who are in the Zoom, so that they can feel they are participating. So I'm very glad to be here with you, with Greg Stoller and Anna Rodriguez. So the discussion that we will have today is about artificial intelligence. So Greg recently published a paper about artificial intelligence, trying to get a sense of threats and opportunities and of the meaning for accounting, both accounting education and research, and also to manage and management in a broad view. And what we are planning to do here, first is for you to get to know Greg. Just to see if you are. Okay. Sorry, Anna. Just so you know, Greg and Anna, I will introduce them for what you already know and for what you don't know yet. Greg has a PhD in accounting history and education from the University of Glasgow in Scotland, and he is a professor of accounting in University of Glasgow with a primary research interest in the history of accounting, the accounting profession, accounting education, and the impact and utilization of information systems in accounting practice in higher education. So we can say that Greg is in the two sides of the question. So looking at history and looking at technology. So also to the future. Greg is editor of accounting education. So for those who are arriving, I brought some numbers and issues of accounting education. Feel free, please, to get one if you are interested. And he is also on the editorial board of Accounting Business Research and was associate editor of issues of accounting education. That is one of the primary publications of accounting, American Accounting Association. So we are here asking Greg to think about the past, the present, and the future of accounting education and management education, but also offering us a view as an editor of the dangers and opportunities of artificial intelligence. Then we have Anna Rodriguez. So Anna Rodriguez is a doctoral student in management and holds a master's degree in accounting and controllership at FAIR. She graduated graduated in administration from the School of Applied Sciences of Unicamp, so State University of Campinas. She is enthusiastic about understanding the empowerment of women through political, social, and economic changes. She is member of Qualitative Research and Critical Accounting Latin America Network, and we are giving here, we three, to go to the conference in Argentina, in Cordoba, that is held by PRCA. And Anna is researching about refugee women and their entrepreneurial trajectories. And this was when she was undergrad student during action period at the University of Minnesota. She's also researching about women who sell food, flavors, and knowledge. And this was during Latin America, the colonial trip.
We call it that way.
In many countries in Latin America can mention, for instance, what we all tell them better than I. And also, she's researching about discussions that involve financial independence, gender, and food as a political and cultural act. So thank you, Anna, and thank you, Greg, for being here. Thank you all for being here also. What we are planning for the session, we will have this introduction. We will have also Greg's keynote presentation. And we will have then provoking talks from Anna and a replica from Greg. This is the first part of our session. And then we will open to questions. And we really expect you to have many questions as we have. Good, Beck? Okay?
Okay.
All right?
All right.
So, Greg, to you.
I'll stand up and I hope the camera vaguely catches me. If I say things in the way that you don't understand, please say, and I'll try and elucidate, make it a bit clearer. So I wrote this paper with two colleagues, Joan Valentine and I forget names, and Gordon Boyce. Okay, and we wrote it for this critical perspectives of accounting, and it's a journal you can pick up. It's a free access paper actually. So I'm going to tell you where I come from. I can't, apart from the fact I come from Glasgow, which is obviously something said before. I basically think of myself as an accounting educator. I had done for far more years than I want to admit. I've been interested in the process of education and in information technology since, well, that's going to give it away, isn't it? Probably since the early 80s. And back in all those days, I wrote a small article about artificial intelligence in 1983, 84. Not in an academic journal, but in a professional journal, the ITAW, English Institute Journal. So I've been kind of interested in that for a long time. I'm also one of the two editors, well, we might say three, because there's a chief editor too, but he doesn't really do very much, of this journal. So Barbara and I basically do the work, most of it. I mean, during COVID, I was the head of accounting and finance at Glasgow University, head of department. So had that sort of managerial role too in running accounting things. I was also head of all the postgraduate accounting programs. And you might think that's a different, in my institution, in accounting and finance together, we have about 700 master students. Which is a lot. I have a particular view of what accounting education should be. And it's not a view which is accepted by all accounting educators, and I'm perfectly willing to accept that and to argue about it if necessary. I think that the key to being an accounting educator is that we're educating our students to be good citizens in the long term, good accountants in the long term. I'm less interested in them being able to do bank reconciliations on day one when they go and work for some accounting firm. I'm more interested in them being good accountants that can think about accounting throughout their careers. Okay, that is my perspective, and I know it's not the perspective of some institutions or some of my colleagues at Glasgow. So it's not just about training for the professional exams, it is about a long-term education. I have two recent outputs of sorts which lie behind parts of this paper. This is the CPA paper that Sylvia has mentioned, and this is something which probably is a bit strange to talk about in this context, but partly because of my role in other organisations, I was asked to co-chair a group which set up benchmark statements for accounting education in the UK. I did it about 8 years ago, and I was asked to co-chair it this year with one of my colleagues, who's also who's one of the editors, this one, Joan Valentine, one of the other people who wrote this paper, and somebody else, okay? The reason this is significant is because we were told that we needed a quite major revamp, quite major rewriting of what the accounting degree should be. So we have filled this document with statements which are not unlike the statements we're making in here, but in a different context, in the context of trying to create change in the accounting academy. So this document is publicly available. It's currently in consultation phase. We expect there will be some political argument about whether or not this is acceptable, but you might think it's an interesting document to look at. As far as I'm concerned, these slides can be made available afterwards, however we want to make them available, okay? So that's where I'm starting from, so you know, okay? I'm first of all going to talk, most of this talk is kind of loosely based on the CPA paper, okay, the CPAS. We're doing it's a critical review of the threats and opportunities, challenges of AI. And in a sense, it's a call for action. It's a call for action to change accounting education to be something it currently often isn't. Not always isn't, but often isn't. And the next slide change is very small. This is, I have to say, my co-authors are not very happy when I put this in, but this is my interpretation of what some accounting educators are like. Lazily laying there on the branch, repeating the same stuff over and over again. I don't think that we can do that and retain relevance. And I think one of the things that shows us that is that throughout the world, accounting as a profession is becoming to be less valued. It's becoming to be difficult to get good students to do accounting. I think it's worse in the States than it is in the United States than it is in most places, but there's a little bit of that effect, I think, in many parts of the world, including in the UK. So I think really it's a call for action to think about how Gen AI particularly can kick us into a new reality, okay? I am obviously hopeful. Some people who know me would think that's very unlike me, because I'm normally pessimistic, not hopeful. But I see this as an opportunity in large part because the threats are significant. This is kind of based, I suspect, mainly on an Anglo-Saxon perspective of accounting education. But I know that it's not unique to us, because I know there's attributes of this which are also relevant in other places. But for a long time, most accounting education is not starting from a great starting point, because we often dominate our courses with technical stuff, which is kind of almost ephemeral. It's almost temporary. Because the accounting standards change. Accounting practices change. And technology has massively changed accounting practice during the period that I've been an accounting educator. Yet, some of our main courses in accounting have not really changed in 40 years. Financial Accounting 1 is still much the same as it was 40 years ago. Yes, there are differences, but the basic structure is the same. And you'll find a very similar structure on intro accounting in the United States, or similar courses in almost any part of the world, I think. And there's a lot of pressure from the profession to conform to this technical stuff. In some places in the world, it's because the university degree is the entrance qualification. And in some places, it's because, and this is the case in the UK, although it's not the entrance qualification, students doing our degrees get exemptions from some of the professional exams, and consequently we're under marketing pressure to make our students meet these requirements so that we get the students. So there's a kind of a more complex relationship in the UK than there is in other places. But there is still a pressure in this, okay? We know there's an international pipeline issue, that's what the AAA are talking about a lot. We also know that there's a long history. I mean, I don't quite go back this far. Well, actually I do. I was a student during the 70s of accounting. Of accounting not really adopting the technology very much. Yes, we include a bit of technology, but we haven't changed our understanding of the fundamental accounting model. And perhaps you're going to tell me that hasn't changed. But I'm not going to go through everything on the side. Think about one of the things that accountants are trying to be, or say is part of their domain now, which is sustainability reporting. So perhaps if we are to survive as a profession, we need to be able to have some presence in that space. Because it's not just about reporting financial results, it's about reporting sustainability effects. You just think about a straightforward transaction of buying petrol for the company car. The standard accounting model shows what? Cash going out, or credits are going up, but basically cash going out eventually and petrol being consumed. There's also an effect on carbon emissions. Do we record that directly in our accounting model? No. That's not part of the double entry. There's a whole load of things which are to do with sustainability, which are implied in that simple transaction. We have, in business, systems which deal with that to a degree, or could do, ERP systems, database systems. But do we teach our students enough about those systems so that they can think about accountability in that broader context? And I would say very much no, and to the extent we do, we tend to black box that in technology and think about what goes in and what comes out, but not what's happening in the middle. Because it's too complicated for us thick accountants. Okay? That's technology. No, we don't have to be able to program computers, but we do need to have an understanding of how they work so that we can control what it's doing and understand the underlying data structure. The same applies to AI. Okay, and I'll talk about a bit more about that later. So basically, we three come from the position that accounting education hasn't really kept up. We've kind of played with technology. We include bits of it because we have to, but we don't really change the fundamental ideas that we teach in accounting. We perhaps should. As a pessimist, I picked up this slide thinking this wave is going to come and crash down on us and drown us all. And one of my co-authors, who's a bit more optimistic, said, "Yeah, but really, what we want to do is sort of surf away on the wave and get some momentum. And I think it's actually almost both of those things that I think is important. One of the things that our concentration on technology and our concentration on technique has done within accounting syllabuses is that we don't develop a lot of critical understanding of accounting. How many of our students, our undergraduate students particularly, really could go out into the world and talk about different ways in which we might account for companies' actions? How many of them go out in the world thinking about how we account, even in relatively straightforward financial terms, for not-for-profit companies? It's not just quite the same accounting, because the processes are different. So we think we need to think more about creating critical and creative accountants. And this is partly because using standard kind of Bloom's technology thinking, that knowing stuff, applying stuff, comprehending stuff, knowing stuff, creating and synthesizing, or the top two change around a bit, depending on which version you look, being critical basically, and being creative or designing. Do we send out students who can do that design and that critique work, which is what they need to do to survive in the long term as technology advances? And I think the answer is no. We also need to think about the wider purpose of university. Perhaps it's because I come from a European tradition where universities started as being places of knowledge, not places of application. But we want well-grounded graduates. They have to know their technical stuff, but that's not all they need to know, is really what I'm saying on this slide. So where are we now? Probably at a cliff edge, about to fall over the edge. That's what the Americans kind of think at the moment, unless we do something like make accounting a science so they can get visas. But anyway, that's another political jive, I think, about the Americans. ChatGPT and generative AI have kind of created a crisis in the education field. We're scared of it, I think, most of us, for good reason, but not necessarily for the right reasons, which is not quite the same thing. A bit of semantic use of English, sorry. But in the past, accounting has not changed a lot. I mean, I've done quite a lot of work on Pacioli, who wrote in the 1494 or whatever, 500 years ago. The basic forms of double entry ledger accounts we use now and teach now are the same as then. Pretty much. Some people argue you didn't have a capital account, but apart from that, it's pretty much the same. Is AI at a crunch point? And we think it probably is, and we can't just keep black boxing a bit of technology at the side and pretending it doesn't exist. So this is where I'm feeling slightly uncomfortable, stepping outside my own sphere of accounting education to make it slightly broader to a management sphere. I think some of my management colleagues are a little better at this, but not all of them. Remember that accounting is an important part of that whole process anyway of management, because the accounting numbers obviously determine lots of things that's happening. But automation of work is happening across the sphere. HR decisions, recruitment decisions are increasingly made or aided by using AI. The replacement or augmentation of expertise, we'd like to think it's augmentation of expertise so that we can be better experts. But to some extent, this is also the replacement of expertise. We also all fields of management have some responsibility for managing AI and making sure it's used sensibly, and this has skill requirements. Have the management disciplines applied quicker? I think some of my management colleagues think they had, but not all of them had. And I know some of my management colleagues clearly haven't. Okay, it's a different sphere, it's a different area perhaps, but perhaps they're a bit more into some of the critical space than some accountants are. perhaps there's a route through this valley where we can get to somewhere of interest. There's a whole load of guidance out there from QAA's, the organisation that I'm working with, the benchmarks for Quality Assurance Agency, all our the European Union, all sorts of people have created guidance on how to use AI in education. I'm not going to go into any of that in any detail. There's a bit in the paper, but not great deal. But there are some key benefits or issues to deal with. The issues are often about academic integrity, ethical and responsible use, and something about policies. I'll come back to later. In the academy generally, not just accounting or management, the biggest scare is assessment. How do we stop students cheating? It's basically what hit the headlines in most of the education sphere. I don't think that's a big issue. And the reason I don't think it's a big issue is because if we were asking the right sort of questions in the first place, perhaps it wouldn't be as important. I'll come back to that. Developing AI literacy is a big issue. Policies and practices are kind of vague in reality. Accounting education needs general reform, but I'm not going to go into that. I've already said it. Threats. The basic threat we have in the academy is, do we have academics, do we have professors who are able and willing to take on this technology in a meaningful way? I know what some of the academy want to do: ban students from using AI, therefore we don't have a problem. Can it be done? We gave up pretending that we could stop students using calculators. We gave up pretending students could use the internet. We're going to have to give up pretending they can stop using AI. Increasingly, this is becoming more of a problem, even if you wanted to lock them up, because people have these fancy watches on which communicate with goodness knows what around. So how can you stop it? Yeah, more and more we can use technology. So there's imperatives to change. I think one of the biggest problems here is ethics, I have to say, and I'll talk perhaps a bit more about that if I get a chance in a minute. And then bearing in mind that accounting, in fact most management, but certainly accounting, builds its reputation on being ethical and fair. That's what the whole, the assurance process is about. So that's really important, actually. But this climate change, sustainability, and all this stuff is all just coming important. And a lot of this stuff takes away the notion of having correct answers. I'm just letting that sink in a bit. Many people think accounting gives you correct answers. I have never, right? You buy one of these, again, you take it out of cash. Where do you put it as an asset? Or do you just write it off as an expense? Is there a rule that's determined for that? And if you do it for this, what about for the computer? What size limits do you decide is a throwaway item in its expense, and what do you capitalise? It's always been an issue. And just because this is a throwaway item in a university, doesn't mean it's a throwaway item in a different business. Probably not. And I imagine Anna's hoping I don't throw it away anyway, because it's hers. But anyway, so you've got to think that there's so many issues in accounting which are not correct answers. And I've just picked on something minor and trivial, just to point it out. So we have a big role here in improving accounting education. And the responsibility is on us as academicians. And it's the same as management educators as well. We think that we've got to change, otherwise we're going to fall into the problems that we've had before. And this is where I think, this is in this paper where we say, it's also where what we say in the benchmark saying, we want accounting for citizenship, really. Educate people to be citizens. And they need to be able to deal with ambiguity. Because more and more the decisions which people are going to get paid well for, which is what we want our students to do, and what our students want to be, which is why they're paying fees or not going to work to get money now, is to be in highly paid jobs. If they want to be in highly paid job, they're going to have to deal with the things which are not rule-based, which can otherwise be dealt with by computers. And now because computers are doing AI kind of stuff, they've got to be above the AI stuff. So that's, in a sense, what we need to be doing. And that's dealing with reasoning and debate and judgment and dealing with problems with no answers. So, opportunities. Perhaps we can use some forms of AI to automate some of the mundane stuff. Teaching a double entry bookkeeping, for example. Does anyone need to stand up in front of the lecture to do that? I don't think so. I was never taught it in class. I was told to go and read a book. I know that's a slightly strange thing to do these days, but that's what I was told to do. We can, by saving time here in our curriculum, we can spend more time on trying to build qualities in other ways. We can start renewing or thinking beyond the perspective of just thinking about accounting for capitalist organisations. We know that the way that the accounting standards are set, the conceptual framework, is it starts with this broad idea that there's lots of different people who need accounting data. And then they say, but basically, we're setting the standards to meet the needs of investors. Yeah? Why don't we try and reclaim that alternative space to make our courses relevant to more people and the people who really care, as opposed to people who only care about their own pocket? I could make a joke about somebody who's just got elected in the United States, but I won't. And it also gives us the chance to spend some of the time that we spent teaching boring stuff. Let's be honest, a lot of accounting is boring. But it's not so boring actually for students who often find it very difficult, but for us it's boring. But anyway, think about more alternative pedagogies, think about the discursive ways, the dialogic learning. I know we're in Brazil and therefore I'd have to mention, I mean, I always pronounce his name wrong, Freire. Freire. I always say Freire because it doesn't have a D in it. I keep saying that. But anyway, I know it's wrong, but I think he's a very good writer. He's not the only one who's talked about these sorts of things, but he is a very good writer. And we think about, and this is, I think, really where we have to work, which is thinking about forms of assessment which are appropriate in an AI world. I think rote learning and surface learning, just knowing stuff, has not been very relevant for a very long time. Yes, our students do have to know certain things. They have to know the basic structure of debits and credits, because in the end of the day, they're going to put through journal entries which affect the accounts, okay? Yes, they have to know certain things. They have to know their accounting standards, and they have to know roughly what they say. But they no longer need to know the exact words because it's in their pocket. They can check it surreptitiously if they need to during a meeting. So they don't need to know the exact words, okay? So the rote learning is no use, no point really. Critical assessment is more and more important, okay? We have to admit that this is not easy to do, particularly for those staff who haven't changed much. You know, I might put myself in this category to some extent. I'm not perfect, I haven't done everything I should have done. It is going to take time, and perhaps to some extent we need to recognise that in our workload models within institutions. This is something which is clearly obvious to me when I was in charge of a department during COVID, and we basically said to everybody, put your teaching online. The first thing we did was to change the workload model so that people got more credit for doing it. We said, we're not going to judge you on research at all in the next 2 years. didn't really work. People still did sweet very little in terms of teaching development, and just carried on doing their research. They had less teaching to do. But anyway, let's not get into that. It didn't quite work, but we tried. Okay. Is it working now? Yeah. So one of the foundational skills, I think, which is important as we go through time, is intellectual development. And this is just one model, a model that I quite like, but it's not the only model. But the idea here is about intelligent ability, students' ability to think and to be confident in what they're thinking. Perry talked about this, it's a long time ago now, back in the 1960s, I don't know the earlier date on here, so 1970. He basically talked about that learners through students in college started being dualistic. They want to know the right or the wrong answer. They go through multiplism, which is where anything goes. There's lots of different ways of answering this, and there's no particularly best way of doing it. Through to ideas of relativism, where it kind of depends, what is the best way depends on the circumstances or different issues. Towards the last phase, which is kind of different forms of commitment, a commitment to a particular perspective. I think when Perry was talking about it, he didn't really expect students, undergraduate students, to get to this level, although I've done some research with a colleague which shows that some of them, not all of them, but a few of them do. And this is kind of an interesting graph that I've seen about this. And if you map progress, if you like, against confidence in understanding, if they know there's a right answer and they know they've got the answer, they're very confident in it. We don't like having uncertainty. Uncertainty is always destructive to humans, I think. But we lose confidence in our knowledge as we move through these phases here, but we move up again as we move towards commitment. Never get complete certainty because you're in an uncertain world. Okay. But that's the way it is. And what we need to do in our learning and teaching, is to avoid students reverting, coming down here thinking, oh, this is scary. I mean, let's go back up here, okay? I guess I'm running out of time. I've got no idea what the time is. I haven't got a watch on it, right?
Yeah, 15 to 3.
Okay. I think this is important for accounting area because in most important questions, even in accounting, even in financial reporting, there isn't one single correct answer. How do you account for particular big events? Yeah, you can kind of read the rules in particular way. And we know that the big firms kind of, the international accounting standards are principles based. They're written on the basis that people understand the principles and they apply the principles to the facts in front of them, the situation in front of them. We know that the accounting firms, partly to avoid being sued, try and codify those principles down to a set of rules. And we'll draw decision charts. Is it this? Yes, no. Is it therefore yes? And therefore we disclose it this way. But that's not what the principles-based system says. It always says, even if you follow the rules in the standard and you get down here, if you think this is wrong, you shouldn't do it. Explicitly says that. So this is why the really important questions in accounting don't have, in my view, clear yes, no answers. So that's one thing. And that's one of the reasons why we and our students have to understand the AI tools, and that the AI tools will never give the right answer philosophically, because there isn't a right answer, even if we think it can give a very good answer. And I'm not sure I believe in the latter either. Okay. Judgment is important, particularly in conditions of uncertainty, particularly in situations where we have ambiguity. And that accounting education has to embrace this lower confidence, this dipping confidence, and somehow deal with it and motivate our students through it. I think that's one of the things that's important. This is something which I'll be honest, I was doing some re-prep for this at the weekend, and I read a newspaper, a UK-based newspaper, where it is now, it's on here somewhere. The Observer, which is part of the Guardian, which is a kind of, I'm going to be honest, it's a left-wing paper. I am left-wing. I'm not going to pretend otherwise, which is why I find what's happening in the state very disturbing. But anyway, and this was about chatbot optimization and gaming on AI web searches. And the reason I picked this up is because I was kind of interesting. I'm talking about AI in a couple of days' time. I'll read it and see if there's anything interesting. And there was this reference to this paper by Podcast, etc. And it's talking about the dilemma of the direct answer. If you do a search, in the old days, you did a search, you just got a load of different web pages up. You looked at the web pages, decided if it was relevant to your problem, and you looked at 3 or 4, you might have looked at 3 or 4 pages worth of references, if you were really keen. I always used to, and try and work out what stuff's there, okay? How many people really looked beyond the first 2 or 3 references in the search engine? Relatively small number of people, I suspect, because they want the answer now. And they're not going to get the answer now by sifting through 20, 30 papers. Surely Google knows the most appropriate one and it'll give me that first. No, it doesn't. It gives you the one that's paid more to be shown at the top. So perhaps you look down to the first non-sponsored one. That might be a slightly better strategy, but even that's not going to work. But what we now do, you do a Google search, and at the top of the search you have an AI summary of the search. Wow, that's useful, isn't it? No. If you looked at those AI searches, this paper here, it did its stuff, its research back in about 4 years ago now, and it asked questions about the speed of light, and yeah, the AI got the right answer. Well, hardly surprising, really. Everybody's going to get the same number, aren't they? Pretty much. And one of the questions it asked is, does wind power create more harm than good for the environment than coal power, I guess? I can't remember the exact question they asked. And it came up with the answer, yes, it does more harm than good. Why? I don't know. But they suggest it's because it's picked up on a lot of papers that have talked about how wind farms cause damage to birds, particularly birds of prey. Now, I am keen on the nature, but I'd rather a few birds of prey get killed than the world burns up. So what do you mean by more harm than good? Because remember, what AI does, it doesn't summarize the ideas, it counts the number of words and just tells you which is the most likely word to be in the answer. And then works out the most likely order in which they should be, roughly speaking. It's a probabilistic model. If lots of people post a load of stuff about wind farms damaging birds of prey, that's what the AI will think is the right summary, despite the fact it's all in rubbish newspapers, on the blogs, on nature blogs, and it's not in reference papers, which have done real scientific work. The same is going to happen with an accounting problem. So we have to think about this, the dilemma of the direct answer. We love a direct answer. We want to know if wind farms are a bad idea. We want to know if Trump's going to do good for America. Well, we know he's not, but the bulk of the stuff on the internet says he will. And I suspect that's a lot of the reason why not stupid people, people who are not don't understand AI, which runs a lot of the media, why they voted for the twat. Oh, sorry, the very intelligent person with the wig. Whatever you want to call it. Because that's been brought to the top of their searches. Look at the damage that AI can do in that sort of sphere. Think what it can do to our discipline or our disciplines. So, this is also true of a lot of things which happen in organisations, which we've missed the point of. I used to teach accounting systems. I don't at the moment, but I used to. But different sorts of accounting systems, management information systems, and all that sort of stuff. They have lots of data in them, but the accounting brings to the fore just the financial numbers. And that's what we think tells us about the company. That's what gets reported in the accounts. That's what the investors make their decisions on. And we don't bother to report to the people who care anyway. So, are there opportunities here? Yeah, I think there are. There are lots of opportunities to think about the way we bring the public interest or the social interest back into accounting. The only reason the accounting have the status of being a profession is because they do good for society, not just themselves. That is what being a profession is about. Not just about self-interest or narrow interest, it's about interest of society. How can we really stand there and say at the moment that the accounting profession has an interest in the public interest? Does it look as if it acts as if it does? When all the big firms and many smaller firms regularly get sued for probably deliberately misstating things in accounts. And the professional bodies don't do an awful lot of policing on this stuff. They do a bit when they have to. But we can change our program. We can't change that perhaps in the big scheme of things, but we can change our curricula and our programs so the students coming out from our programs are better educated and think about these things. Even if we let them, well, it's a free world, they can think what they like. They can go and act like capitalists, whatever's, when they leave us. And that's not our problem, but we could at least educate them to know that that's what they're doing, okay? And creating pressure for change. I think universities, I mean, my university in Scotland is quite powerful in the professional sense. I suspect this university in the Brazilian context is relatively powerful. We should use that political pressure, capital, using a bourgeois sense as opposed to the monetary capital. We should use that capital to try and argue for change. It's difficult. It's not going to be easy. And it'll be very difficult in, is it 3 years' time, when Bolsonaro or whatever gets back in. But anyway, let's not get into that sort of issue. But there is space for change, for arguing about political change. And there's also the possibility of accounting education, research and scholarship about how we can do that. And I think this is something we should get into. And one of the big issues, I think, is this idea about ethics and bias. Because of the way that generative AI works, it tends to replicate the biases of the past. It tends to be, for example, racist. Because history is basically racist. It probably tends to be colonial or imperial. It almost definitely tends to be capitalist. I don't know about this country. In Scotland, and I'm saying Scotland as opposed to the whole of the UK, over 50% of the economy is public sector. So most of our students aren't going to go out and work for capitalist organisations. They're going to go for the government, not-for-profits, charity, that sort of thing. Is it any great surprise that most of these charitable organisations are moving more and more like capitalist enterprises. When all of our management education is about managing in capitalist for-profit organisations. That's our responsibility. You can't blame it all on the organisations. It's our responsibility. So this is kind of important, I think, and the bias which is embedded here is really important. I'm just going to say a very brief bit about the accounting benchmark statements, because I'm proud of them, okay, partly. So Joan Ballantyne, myself and Anita, chair, Joan's the chair, we both went for chair, and she got chair and I got co-chair, and I was so relieved. She's very good at organising things, and I can't even keep a lecture to time, as you've noticed. So I did most of the writing and she did most of the organising, which was a great split. But it's a major rewrite that talks about the broad notions of accounting and account. So it brings back the different users and accounting for different sorts of organisations. And it says things like, this is why we're going to get heavily argued against, I think. An accounting degree is not competent if it doesn't include accounting in non-profit organisations. It's a really big part of our sector, because most of the local government has been subcontracted to non-profit third sector organisations. But accounting is also about accounting for sustainability. I think that one's relatively acceptable. Until you realise, when people begin to realise that the UN sustainability criteria aren't just talking about climate change, they're talking about equality and equity amongst the population. I think most people stop at, we'll stop CO2 emissions. That's kind of important, but it goes all the way down. We need to move beyond just the technical. Yes, we have to recognise that the technical is an important part of our profession, of our field. But it's how we use it that's important, not how we apply it. And I'm emphasising the long-term issues, and there's a whole load of stuff in here about issues at EDI, and there's a whole section on Gen AI. And the Gen IA stuff, so as much as I've said before, and as much as you'll see in many papers about the use of AI in education. I saw a summary of a presentation from a colleague of mine from Glasgow University, not in the management school, I'd say, from engineering, on LinkedIn just yesterday, which I thought, well, that's interesting, it's covering most of these things. But then it had a last point, which is, we must teach students to trust AI. God forbid. We must teach students not to trust AI. We have to make sure that students question the output from these systems. Even if you have regulation to try and avoid the AI answers being racist, sexist, and all that stuff, those are normally AI processes which themselves will learn to be racist, sexist, and whatever. So, this is important, and this stuff here about ethics, I think, is really one of the main issues that we have to think about. How this affects the nation of ethics and about scepticism. One of the big issues in accounting in the UK, and I think the States, and probably here too, is the notion of professional scepticism. Not believing everything you're told. Certainly don't believe if it comes out of an AI machine. I'm not saying it's not helpful, but don't believe it. And I think that's really one of the big issues I want to say here. Assessment is a big issue, and I personally think the day of the road test is kind of gone. It's very difficult to really make a place secure where multiple choice tests or all that stuff are really any real use at all. I know that's scary because that's how many people test their students. I think to some extent, using the same essay question every year for umpteen years is kind of pointless. And really, I think assessment's going to have to start moving into the natural space, authentic assessment. Thinking about something I was talking to Anna about the other day, she was talking about a degree in Costa Rica, where part of their assessment, I think, was about building a business and accounting for it and managing it. If they can do that, it's not because they've just learnt the stuff. They've learned how to apply it, learned to apply it critically, respond through the 3 or 4 years of the business, 4 years, so that they can go beyond that pure technical stuff. We can't all do that in all of our program, but that's the sort of stuff we need to think about moving more towards. Implications for journals and editors. I've got papers which are written by AI. At the moment, it doesn't bother me because they're so obviously rubbish, they're going to get rejected anyway. And they're going to get desk rejected. I haven't seen one which I think has even got a material part of AI in it, which I'll put through a review. I hope somebody doesn't say you can put mine through. But that we are going to get more and more stuff which is produced by AI. And in 3 or 4 years' time, it won't be as easy to tell. And the problem with AI produced research in journals is not so much that it's because it's done by AI. It's probably not based on any actual data. It's artificially generated data as well. At the moment, you can't even do that, most of it. This has a big worry for me for the evaluation of the literature if it starts getting through, and I think it does get through occasionally. I bet even I'll publish some stuff with AI in it, but not which is all AI. There's ethics in the use of AI. Is it an author aid, or is it the AI actually writing it? If it's in this end, perhaps it's okay. This is clearly not, because AI can't take responsibility. There's a big problem about effectively AI stealing other people's work. I haven't seen a lot of academics talking about this, but people in the music field, etc., and art field talk about it a lot. Do the authors have responsibility for that? In my view, yes. If you use AI to summarise the literature and you use that without properly referencing it, I think you're responsible, not the AI, because you're controlling it. What about to improve language translation? Oh, this is a really tricky one, particularly for me, speaking in English, which is my home language, in an environment where your normal language is Portuguese, where you are expected to publish in journals which publish in English. I feel quite scared talking about this in this environment, but I'm willing to give it a go. If it's improving the translation, I don't actually have a great deal of problem, but it should be credited. The general policy says you should say you've used AI to improve the translation. But how do you know, let alone me, if it's done more than just change the grammar? That's the kind of tricky bit, okay? We all have policies about it. I think some people ask, can you join author with AI? I think no, not really. But it depends. Every journal, my journal has changed its policy about 4 times in the last 2.5 years. So you have to look at the policies they are. What do you think about it? Basically, I hope you're going to get some questions later. And I'm going to stop there because I've got my time. Thank you.
I first think that everyone now wants to invite Greg to talk to our professors as well, because I want that all my professors should be here, so it would be really good for them. I don't have answers, but I want to raise 2 questions here for you as a early scholar, early professional as well. But at first I wanted to ask you, have you ever used AI for your research? Yes?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. Which tools?
Wow, it's very good at, synthesizing.
Synthesizing,
Yes.
Which tool you use? ChatGPT,
Chat PDF,
Chat PDF,
Consensus,
Consensus,
Research, connected papers.
Connected Paper, Perplexing,
Obviously, AI.
AI, okay. Grammarly, Cloud. Okay, so 10 different ones at least here in like a few minutes. So I think we can all agree that unavoidable.
Yeah.
Everyone is using, we cannot run from it,
Yes.
right? I also think, like myself and probably most of you, we are in a very strange position in our life, because I'm doing a PhD, so I'm a student, I'm also a professor, and I'm also a researcher. So how can I navigate those three spaces with this all AI coming? So when I started studying my school, I have to go to the library and get the books. And then we had Google, and now we have AI, like generative AI. So what we do with that? So the first thing that I believe that we should learn how to use it, proper use it. Because most of the journals are saying that you should avoid it. It's just impossible, right?
Yeah.
Our students are using it. We are using it. So we just have to be, true to ourselves and our peers as well. So the first thing it would be really use it, try it out, but be responsible, understanding, like Greg said, that is a mathematical behind it. Even though if you're a qualitative researcher or something like that, if you use AI, you're using a mathematical tool, a statistical tool, probability tool. So understand that we discussed this a lot, right? And if you keep asking the AI to give you the answer, eventually they give you the answer that you want, and not the one that is really the answer or one of the right answers possible. So how can we talk in our schools, in our faculty, with our faculty members, with our peers, how to use AI? Does anyone have an answer to that? How can we move beyond that?
I would say that starting from not avoiding,
Not avoiding.
not blaming, and not putting in the policies of the journals or the programs and the university as something that you cannot. Because it's like kids, if you say, don't put your finger here, you're gonna put it. So I think if the speech starts from the ones who makes policies saying you are able to use it, feel free to use it, but plus then, if the speech comes from here, I think the kids, this part of will be like, oh, okay, so it's not something that is forbidden. Okay, so I will use like everybody's using. It's not a bad stuff. I think that this concept of doing the forbidden thing and not trying, to show like, my supervisor not gonna know that I use it. I'm not gonna say. I think this speech. So this speech not gonna exist anymore in some years. It will be like free, But this is the but. I think not every university and program, they know how to use it to be able to teach. So I think we are in an era right now that everybody needs to learn from each other. you know, like public science, we need to go for it and dig into the material and understand how to have this responsible use. Like you said in the beginning, it is unavoidable.
I think, especially from the researchers, we need to demand that they have transparency in how they use it. Like in ChatGPT, I'm using it as a methodological tool in my master's degree, and we've been oriented to always like really show the prompts we used. You know, like I had to do this, so I used this prompt, and it gave me a wrong answer, so I changed this and that, and you know, that transparency can make the process, the whole process, more transparent.
Actually, it's a very actual discussion about this right now. But we using Excel for a long time. It was not. It was a tool. It was a technology tool, but there was no way. There was no AI. For Atlas, as I told you, after Atlas AI. Atlas used to in order to analyze content, but now you have this Atlas AI. So what are the problems? So 2 years ago, you used to choose one tool like this one. There's no this AI issue, and everybody was using. Nobody was talking about. But the main thing that is discussing right now in the company that I can see is that for writing, because at the end of the day, you want to write a thesis or a dissertation. And if you use AI really for writing, so I see a big problem with this. For research, it saves some time. Okay, so it saves some time, it saves some help. So, I mean, the big problem is writing using AI. Not researching, not saving time, not better organized because you have a tool that does that. That's Excel did for 20 years now, and now it's this AI. It's just trying to organize and save your time. But writing, so now, yeah. Now, 3 years ago, you have Grammarly, as someone said, and there was no Grammarly with AI, but now there is AI. So I was writing using Grammarly 3 years ago without AI, and I'm wrong here using Grammarly right now using AI. So it's a discussion.
I think that one thing important is that Grammarly was always an AI, right?
Yes.
We've been using AI for the past 4 years in our daily lives.
Exactly.
The difference that, as Greg said, is like this generative AI, okay? But Grammarly was always AI, and the model itself was an early generative AI already in 4 years ago or something like that. So the difference that right now we know it because we've been using it for a long time.
Yeah.
Generative is a new technology.
Yeah, but not that new, you know?
No,
It's just like more popular.
now you
right
know
now.
that you will
Yeah.
use this.
So I think for us, the point would be, or maybe the word that I would like to say in this first point would be, we have to be vulnerable to say, okay, I don't know. Let's sit together. Let's talk to our professor. Let's talk to our, and transparency as well, I think is one of the big issues. But be vulnerable, because as a professors, we are studying here to be professors in one day, or researchers or whatever. We have to be vulnerable all the time. We are in front of a class. I'm afraid to be here right now, you know, but you have to fight it. And with AI, we also have to do the same. So sit with your peers, like Tilke, she's my advisor. And when I try prompts and different stuff, like I always send to her, let's talk together and see how this can be better or not. What are the problems with that? So talk to people, you know, that would be maybe the first point. And the second thing that I would say, there's one say in French, I don't know how to speak French, so I translated it to English, so that's it. We change a lot, and at the end of the day, we stay the same. And I believe that in some aspects, generative AI is basically the same idea. From one point specific, we are Brazilians, or most of us here are Brazilians, and our language is Portuguese, right? But if you don't speak English, you cannot even access AI. Or if you have a bad connection in internet, you cannot even access AI. So in a certain aspect, we have to be really careful and really understand the privilege for having access to AI. Even when we enter ChatGPT and we don't pay, we are paying, but with our data, with our IP, with other things. So we really have to be careful, because at the end of the day, there is a lot of claims about that, the generative AI will give access to everyone, it's democratic, but at the end of the day, it's not. So mostly the same people that have access to Google, for example, are the ones that have access to generative AI. And you have better prompts and have better access if you pay for it. So we cannot forget that it's also an imperialistic and colonial way of managing the data that we have in our world. So that's the second point. So it would be kind of being vulnerable and talk to our peers and understand like what really in the base and how the power dynamics works within that. I was really short, so we can have 10 minutes for answers and questions. So that's it. Thank you. Questions?
I'll just make a couple of comments on the things that have been said, okay? If somebody asks me, have I seen or have I used AI well in the classroom, I'm going to say that the best use I've seen is not my use, but one of my colleagues, who works quite a lot on concepts of inner feedback, or so. There's a whole in the education sphere. There's a whole lot of research on feedback. What student feedback should we give students? But there's this professor who's now part-time at Glasgow, was at Strathclyde, been elsewhere, called David Nichol, who writes a lot about inner feedback. His terms have changed a bit in the last few years, and he's done some work with one of my colleagues, Suzanne McCallum, on getting students to create their own feedback by comparing their work with other people's work. And one of the best uses of AI I've seen is to put an AI answer within that set of comparatives. And this is really good in lots of respects, partly because they can see how AI works. I think when she used it the first time round, she didn't disclose it as AI until afterwards. But I think nowadays she does it disclosing it's AI. So it does some interesting things. It makes students question their own work because they think the AI or the other people, students often think other people are better than them. So they think it's better than their answer. And then they think, well, is it really? But also it gets them, once they realise it really is AI, to question whether the AI is really doing what they thought it was going to do in giving them the answer. Because they can see holes in the AI logic. And I think that's a really interesting way in which we can use it. That's one of the things that came up from your question.
We have a question, and YouTube. So is Elena asking how to democratize AI to reduce social inequalities?
You can't. AI is run by capitalist organisations who are basically running it to create money. That's my gut reaction. I'm afraid.
Short answer would be end capitalism.
Now, there is one example which again has become a very new policy. Not my university, but one of our biggest competitor universities in Scotland, Edinburgh University. Very recently, I think within the last few months, I only saw it last week, a new policy on AI. And they say you can use AI, but you must use it through the university's AI platform. And if you put it through the university's AI platform, you can only use the stuff which the university pays for, so all students have the same access, all students are equal, It's not going beyond students, I'm afraid, but all students are equal. And also, Edinburgh have managed to negotiate with the AI platforms they're using that the material that is presented to be, let's say, grammar checked by AI, does not become part of the AI company's database. This is really important from a copyright issue perspective, and it's really important in protecting your research, particularly if it's important research like medical research, where putting it into AI basically discloses it to the world, which means any embargoes you have on publication are pointless because anybody can find it. But it also protects you on your copyright of your actual words in whatever you write. Now, I think that's a massively good policy. I don't know why we don't all have such policies, and I think as universities, we probably should move in that sort of direction. So that does make it a bit more egalitarian within our space. But in the overall space of the community, I'm sorry, my first comment counts. They're capitalist organisations, and they're gonna extract profit out of it one way or another, and it's going to basically take our work and take money from profit from that.
We have time for one more question, maybe here from the audience.
I do have one.
Okay,
Can I, Greg, for you? When you were talking about the higher education and accounting, and you were talking about the critical thinking, these critical perspectives, in your opinion, what would be these critical perspectives alternatives that you are waiting from the accounting students?
I don't think there is one other critical perspective. I think there are many, but I think the first one, the one that for accounting students, I think it's true for all management students actually, but particularly for accounting students, is to question the capitalist model. And you might say that's me being left-wing political. I don't think it is, because many of our organisations are not capitalist organisations. They might begin to operate like them because of policies of the past. But there's a lot of the economy which is not broadly about for profit. It's not for profit, it's local government, it's government. And I could make jokes again about Trump or any of these other people, but that's not their purpose. Their purpose is to serve the community in some way. So that means being accountable to the community. So I'd say accounting is about accountability. And accountability isn't only to those who currently have power, those with money. It's also to those who should have power to help empower them. That sounds idealistic. I don't think we're going to get there quickly, but we should do what we can to move in that direction. And one of the ways we should do that is to stop making all of our examples in our accounting classes something limited or some companies trying to make a profit.
Yeah, I think the examples part is really important. So for example, how can we use AI for that? Can you help me to build a case study with a woman or a Black person or a different company or those kind of things, you know? And as Greg said, and I completely agree, it's our responsibility. We are kind of forming people to the markets or whatever they're gonna work. But if you don't show the possibilities, they just don't know, right? So it's our responsibility to do that.
And I think it'd be more interesting for us as accounting academy, accounting lecturers or professors, whatever, to have students in our class who are more questioning about the underlying models that are assumed to be accounting. It would take away that unhelpful stereotype of accountants being bean counters, being the grey suits, because we need not be. I think that's really important. It's about reporting responsibility to whole groups of different people. That's what the accounting profession set up itself to be, but it's not what it has become.
Unfortunately, we don't have more time for questions, but I want to first to thank you all for being here and for being vulnerable. I think is what we have as a takeaway of this discussion. So let's see what happens. Let's try to learn from our students.
Can I say one last thing?
Okay.
I think the last thing I want to say is we need to learn to not trust AI, and we need to educate our students to not trust AI.
Yeah.
To be critical of AI just as they should be, not as they are, but they should be of any other authority. Even me as a lecturer telling them what they think.
So thank you, Greg. Thank you, Anna. And I want to call attention to a concept that Paulo Freire brings into our discussion, because then capitalism is difficult. But Paulo Freire has an idea of inédito viável. Has anyone heard about it? So what we can do with what we have, because sometimes change comes from little steps. So something you do in the classroom, something you do together with colleagues from other parts, something you do as we are doing here. The translation would be by default, unprecedented feasibility. So trying to do differently from what you have, because sometimes you cannot change the big picture, but you can change a little bit what you do daily. So I have a chance with Ellen and Akira to try in our research method class to build a meeting about subversive and emergent methodologies. So to ask them to do whatever they want to do, related or not to the research topics, but trying to present it as personal, as they want to present. And they brought to us music and movies, and they brought to us diaries. So this is a mural, something as a wall made for each one that tells us about they, he or she, and tells us about us also. So I would invite you to try to think differently together, so that we can build the inédito viável until we end the capitalism, maybe. Thank you very much.